Yeah, right. Black hole.
Well, good afternoon and welcome, everybody. I'm Commissioner Ginny Storley, and I'm very pleased that we're finally together to start working on this ordinance. And I welcome also our Assessor Bob Thompson, who's not able to make it here today, and from the public, Hilary Freeman will be joining us too. So welcome, both of you. I think first of all, we'll just start off and going around and introduce ourselves. I welcome the alternates over here too. And so I think according to our schedule here, I will go ahead and we'll just start off with the next one on the list, which is, yes.
Madam Chair, I think it would be a good idea too, that if they, when they introduce themselves, they kind of discuss or tell a little statement about their connection with vacation rentals. Such.
Okay, we will start over here.
I'm John Schlote. I live up the Gunflint Trail on Gunflint Lake. I'm a past member of the Planning Commission that helped bring these into being in the first round. I owned Cross River Lodge for 13 years, just sold it in February. I also had a vacation rental cabin. So I kind of see both sides of it, and I think I have a pretty clear understanding of this whole ordinance and why we're here today.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Robert Disher. I'm the Grand Portage Tribal Chair. I'm just here kidding my goodness. No, I was a former commissioner too. We in Grand Portage too have concerns about vacation rentals and housing that's taken up in the county for ladies, etc.
I'm John Frederickson. My wife and I own Gunflint Lodge and Gunflint Lake. Owning a lodge, obviously, we are exposed to the short-term rental market, being a resort. So that's my familiarity with it.
I'm Emily Hausner. I'm General Manager of Caribou Highlands, which is an Odyssey resort. I have by license about 15% of the county's licenses at my property that I manage. So I have a lot of experience dealing with short-term rentals, especially in a high density, high population area.
I'm Stevie Plummer. I've been mostly managing the communication side of vacation rentals for a little over 6 years now. I've worked for a few different owners, and I've also done a little bit of cleaning, maintenance for vacation rentals as well, and have just recently built 2 of my own tiny off-grid vacation rental homes. And I'm very interested in hearing more of everyone's opinion here. I'm in the place of, I think, more listening than providing my opinion right off the bat, because there are so many aspects that are important to take into consideration with this, as everybody knows. And I'm just very curious and interested in learning all of those and being a part of hopefully a fix for the situation.
I'm Jason Dale. I'm the Executive Director of the HRA for Cook County. So obviously I have an interest in that regard, of course. That's my primary interest, is to safeguard and increase the amount of affordable housing in this community and housing generally. I'm also run my own Airbnb in Duluth, and so I have experience being on that side of the fence. So it's a balancing act. So very excited that we're all around the table to talk about it and figure out how we reach that middle path.
My name is Al Fleeter. I've been a proud property owner, a small rustic log cabin on Clearwater Ward for 42 years. Been involved in numerous organizations in Cook County. Came here through the Cook County Coalition of Lake Associations, and recently finished a term with the Gunflint Trail Historical Society. cetera, et cetera. Have two somewhat growing kids and grew up in a small town on the opposite side of the state, Canby, about the same size as Grand Marais. So pleased to be there.
I'm Anton Moody. I'm a city councilor for the city of Grand Marais. And that's why I'm here. I'm also a contractor up here and interested to, if I can add anything from my insights on that to the conversation, I'm happy to do that. And just try and understand and learn what the county has planned. So that the city can be on the same page.
Steve Serba, I'm one of the owners of Cascade Vacation Rentals. I started it in 2004. I also sit on the steering committee for Explore Minnesota concerning short-term rentals, and I've also sat on the Minnesota Department of Health steering committee around short-term rentals.
My name is Molly Hicken. I'm the Cook County attorney. And so I serve as kind of in-house counsel for the county, meaning I advise the county commissioners, I advise land services department, help with ordinances, I advise the tax assessor. So I'm here kind of to follow the process, provide miscellaneous legal advice where I'm able, and to kind of keep a record of what we're talking about and what our motivations are, so that when it comes to crafting a new ordinance, if we're going to do that, we include what we need to include and all the rationale that we come up with here. I also am the next door neighbor of a vacation rental that was purchased in the last 2 years. So
I'm Scott Melhoff. My wife and I own Best Western Superior in Grand Marais. Family has owned it since 1983. Our daughter has moved here as well. She's the 4th generation in the family business. And we did move here 2 years ago, officially bought a home, sold our house in Detroit Lakes after 27 years. Been on many committees in Detroit Lakes and in that area into Fargo, and so look forward to getting involved in Grand Marais. On the same committee as Steve and John with Minnesota Lodging Association for vacation rentals, and I applaud Grand Marais for being one of the first ones to have some sort of regulations for vacation rentals. And it's exciting to, things change, as we all know, especially the last couple of years. It's just time to refresh.
I'm Charlie Laboda of the Cook County Planning Commission. Also a local excavation contractor and fire chief, so primarily as the representative of the Planning Commission here.
And I'm James Yorkie. I'm the county administrator. I've been in this role for going on 2 years now. Like Stevie, I'm mostly here to listen and learn. I know that even before I interviewed for this position, I know this has been a topic of great interest in the community. I know there are a lot of perspectives, and I'm really here just to learn kind of what those perspectives are, to participate in the discussion, and hopefully get us to a good place. So thanks a lot for being here.
Okay, my name is Tim Nelson. I'm the Director of Land Services, just the department that basically governs or regulates the vacation rental activity. I started here about 23 years ago, back when there were no permits required and no regulations whatsoever for this. So I'll go over a brief kind of history of it in the presentations going up, but that's why I'm.
Brady Powers, Cook County Auditor. And under the, my interest is primarily the lodging tax collection under those resolutions and ordinances for lodging taxes. The auditor is the administrator of that tax.
I'm Joseph Ruth. I'm the vacation rental administrator for the county. And the reason I got to this position is 3 years ago in a staff meeting, Tim asked for volunteers. Who would like to take care of the vacation rental program? And so the long and short of it is don't volunteer.
Thank you. And virtually we have.
Hi, I'm Hilary Freeman, and I live up in Coville, and I am just a happy resident who's always interested in government and how decisions are made, and find this a really interesting topic. I've been involved with the Citizens Advisory Budget Committee for several years now and look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have Bob?
Yep. Hello, Assessor Bob Thompson. And I'm sorry I won't be able to attend the whole meeting because of a prior commitment, but I can provide any information related to the property taxation of the short-term rental properties. And I can also provide a lot of, data about the numbers, how they've changed over the last few years.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to tell Bob that we probably, depending on the interest of the committee, we'll ask for a presentation from him with regards to the tax classification issues. It's a little separate from the regulatory type issues, but it's really integral in this discussion as well. So that we anticipate doing it maybe the next meeting or so.
Okay, very good. And thank you, alternates, for being here. This way you'll kind of keep up with everything and be on top of what's going on, because there'll be a lot of things to talk about. So we have the agenda attachments. You'll see that highlighted. We have the purpose and goal of the committee process, and then on the back, you'll see all of these things that hopefully we'll get to at least through maybe 7 or 8, we'll see. I like to start meetings on time, and I would ask that if you have a comment or you have a question or whatever, now that I can see all of you here, or Hilary and Bob up there, just please raise your hand. I think we can all be respectful of each other and have opinions, but give each other time to talk about it. So I will turn the next phase over to Tim.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. This is just a little snapshot of the purpose and the goals of the committee process. We go back, and like I said, I'm going to be starting back and doing a brief history of where we've come to where we are now. But specifically for this process, when I took this to the Board of Commissioners on May 24th, the purpose and the goals are kind of broad perspective. And the whole point of it was to try to bring it up to, again, the 10,000 foot level, to relook at pretty much all of the ideas, all of the goals, all of the issues that we're dealing with, because they're different now than they were back in 2015 when we really started engaging in this. So the statement that is listed in the board packet that the board did adopt is the purpose of the overall initiative is to perform a complete review of the Cook County Vacation Rental Ordinance and License Program to determine whether the goals of the program are being met and if any changes need to be made. And I'll go into also the steering committee report, because basically it was determined that the best way to do this is just through a series of questions. And the questions that are listed in the steering committee report are just a framework, and it's expected that the questions that are in there are going to generate other questions. And so it's anticipated, we're going to be spending time asking a question, then kind of going down some of the 8 themes and hope they don't turn into rabbit holes. And that's where we'll have to trust our chair to bring us back in if we start going a little too far down the path. But there's a list of questions on there, basically, and those are kind of what's listed to guide us in this discussion. Do we need to continue to regulate vacation rentals? What are the goals? We had goals to begin with. The issues, as we'll talk about later, are changing a little bit here in the focus and stuff. And so we're going to kind of go on a questions-based type of approach on this and just see where it takes us. I will say too that we are a little crunched on time because our ordinance actually sunsets at the end of the year. And so if we come up with changes that we want to make in the program, and most likely there are going to be, we need that time to be able to process through the public hearing process to get them put in and updated by the end of the year. If we don't have anything by the end of the year, we'd either have to do one of 2 things: go to the commissioners and request an extension, or readopt the ordinance for another specified period of time, or the ordinance just goes away and no requirements will be in place then. So I would imagine that, that is our goal, to finish up by like mid-September timeframe, even pushing towards October. We have notice requirements that we have to fulfill to get into the newspaper to make any changes to the official documents. So that's kind of that goal. It's the mid-September to, maybe towards the first part of October, but not into October because we need that time. So that, unless anybody has any questions, that's the goals and of the committee, the purpose and goals of the committee process. And I can, Madam Chair, you'd like me to just go right into the presentation? Okay, so I'll transition into the presentation of the history. It's going to be brief. I know I have the tone of my voice kind of puts people out. So I purposely tried to inflect, so that I can gain people's attention or so. So just bear with me. And I did try to keep it kind of brief so it doesn't drone on and on. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. Yes, this is similar to a presentation that I had provided to the County Board of Commissioners at their Committee of the Whole meeting earlier this year. So, but there are some slides taken out, some replaced and some updated. So basically, from 1984 to 2020, vacation rentals were permitted uses, or just listed as generally permitted uses where no permits were actually required, no requirements were on them except for Minnesota Department of Health, but they were generally permitted in all residential zone districts. So they were basically from the beginning of our modern zoning ordinance, and even prior to that, we just kind of used 1984 as the benchmark because we went from an old ordinance and changed, all the zones changed from the 70s into the 84 ordinance. And so we use that as the benchmark. And vacation rentals are listed as the permitted uses in or had been in all the residential zone districts. They changed a little bit when each of the townships did their sub area planning and then requested and adopted different changes. So there's a little slight variations with Tofty and Lutzen, I believe. I don't think Schroeder has any different. But okay. So it has been a long-standing discussion, even prior to 2015, but 2015 is when the Board of Commissioners actually established the first official committee to go ahead and discuss this. And I will say, if you look at the information in your packets, you can see they're benchmarked into kind of three phases. We have the 2015 phase through the 2018, then 2018 up to about 2020, and then 2020 to now. And then now this phase is going on. So there's three basic phases. When we started off in 2015, there was a lot of discussion, but in each of the committee resolutions coming to an end of those resolutions, the recommendation going back to the Board of Commissioners was, no, there's not enough concern for us to adopt any regulations. And so it had been looked at, it had been discussed, and we decided, nah, we're not going to do it. And that happened maybe about at least three times where we went through the committee process and came back with a declaration saying, no, we're not going to do it. It wasn't until the 2019 timeframe, late 2018, 2019 timeframe, where enough of the issues started really cropping up and enough concern was expressed. And that was generally more towards the adverse impacts in the immediate area. We weren't really even looking at resorts and the impacts of self-managed resorts or anything. We were looking at vacation rental homes. And so the big emphasis at that point was incompatible uses in the residential areas, shoreline being kind of that key there. So in 2019, on May 22nd, we adopted that ordinance, the first ordinance version of it. And we did so expressly with the intent that it would drop dead by the end of this year, 3-year period. And we did that on purpose so that we would be forced into this position to step back and take another look at it. We knew we were just starting into the game of administrating regulations and enforcement. And we knew that we were going to need a review period to see, are we meeting our goals and such like that. And that was one way to be able to make that happen, kind of officially and force us into this position, which is a good thing. We retained host compliance, which is a web-based kind of bot AI hosting platform for us in the internet, and they go off and they send these bots and they gather up all the information of who is advertising either through VRBO or any of the other vacation rental sites, and then they evaluate them and they pick the geographic area and they'll feed it in. Plus, in addition to the bots trying to checking for advertisements, they also manage the licensing platform for us. They're the ones that would send out the letters that we would initiate for them to send out. They send them out, they make the contact with the property owners, and then the property owners log into through our website into their hosted service that tracks the licensing program. So there's been a lot of just like a lot of growth and expansion in the concerns and issues from a community perspective. There's also a growing period over these 3 years for our relationship with this host compliance. There are other programs out there, but frankly, for the cost effort that we're in and the value that we're getting out of it, I still haven't seen another vendor, web-based vendor service that would beat their services for what we are paying for them. So we started it, so we adopted the ordinance in 2019. We made the ordinance effective January 1st, 2020. So that became effective in 2020. And then our online licensing system went on February 28th of 2020. And that's when we started officially running all the licensing. So this goes back to, this document is in your packet, a 2018 survey on how counties in Minnesota regulate that vacation rentals. And it's like anything, I send surveys out all the time to all the different counties around the state and ask for how are they doing this or how are they doing that. We've hit on vacation rentals a couple times. I did a current one, and I'll be doing a presentation on that at another meeting on the current status of it because it changes. But if you look, the biggest category there is we do not regulate. So the biggest category is vacation rentals really haven't been an issue. At that time in 2018 across the state of Minnesota, not every county is destination county. So, those ones, the Brainerd Lakes area and all that stuff, we just understand that those are going to be have more concerns than just regular metropolitan type areas, although Duluth is big and had their points of issues as well. So if you look back at 2018, we fit into that generally permitted category, which so the largest category was not regulated at all. The second category was interim use permit, conditional use permit. We'll get into the distinction between those and why we chose the licensing. And just real briefly, we did it because of logistics. The numbers of operations that we have and the number of licenses that we do, we kind of go through maybe 24 to 30 at tops conditional interim use permits in a year. We have hundreds of vacation rentals, and if we added that to the pool, we just logistically couldn't do that. Plus, on licensing, it's nice to be able to change the requirements on an annual basis. We can update what those requirements are if need be. It's a lot easier to do that with a license program than it is with the conditional or interim use, which has a specified period of time. So that's where we are at right now, is on the county level annual license thing. It's a minority of what other counties are doing it, but frankly, that's the vast majority of other counties aren't doing anything. So real quick, and this is one of the key components that we do need to discuss, and this will set what our goals really want to be, is the definition of a vacation rental. And we started looking at it, and there's the term short-term rental, vacation rental, and it really applies really differently across the board in terms of what that puts into the barrel for regulating. And so we just looked at it and we thought, okay, we're going to kind of narrow our scope down and see what we come up with. So we picked, it has to be less than a 30-day period of time. These are just hitting the high points here. It's not a bed and breakfast because we already have a conditional use, interim use permit category for bed and breakfasts. And then excludes similarly described premises which are managed and regulated as a part of a hotel or resort. That's been a challenge, for us to get in. We actually did not think we were going to get so involved into resort operations as we have And that'll certainly be part of our discussions going forward. Minnesota Department of Health, they have their lodging, they just put them in the lodging category in their definition. So it's different. And I would just back up a second and say that on the good side, this isn't just a Cook County issue. This is not a state of Minnesota issue. This is not a regional issue. This is, worldwide, people are going through these issues. The jurisdictions are and how to manage these things. And certainly because we are a destination community and because we have such a low population and such a high amount of land that's out there, we're on the front lines of this. And so every year, frankly, it's a standing point agenda item of discussion at our annual County Planners Association when we meet on a statewide level to discuss this. And again, this year we'll be inviting Minnesota Department of Health to come in and discuss it as well with us. So it is an ongoing thing. And, the states wanted to turn a lot of the stuff over to the counties. We'll get into that later too, in terms of there's a distinction between those counties that operate or have adopted the food, beverage, and lodging program, and they're a delegated county through the Minnesota Department of Health. We used to be up until 1999, and we found that we didn't have the staff and funds to be able to perpetuate that, and we talked to the Minnesota Department of Health. They took that back. So we were at a time on the county level doing all of the well sampling and everything like that for all of the resorts and lodging facilities that are there. We stopped that in 1999, like I said. So how many vacation rentals are there? I tend not to try to look too much at the social media, but I see that when there are posts, there's a wide opinion in terms of how many there are. And it really does depend on the definition as to how many that are out there. And so we start with basically the initial estimate that we started off with was total 634. That's including everything. That's using the broadest definition that we have. That totaled 634 units. Our definition winnowed that down to 270 for our RFP, our request for proposals for the host compliance program to go search those lots for us. So that just the change or the specificity in our definition brought that number down to the 270. The first report that had come in from host compliance tallied 377, but that included the city of Grand Marais, and that included some other areas. So like I was saying before, we had to work a lot with host compliance to refine that list. Bob Thompson was key in that. Joseph's key. The auditor's office was key in going back and forth and trying to winnow out really what is counted as the vacation rental as per ordinance and where jurisdictionally they lie or not. We do not have jurisdiction within the city of Grand Marais. So I just want to set that there. We don't have the ability to regulate vacation rentals in Grand Marais or on tribal lands up in the Grand Portage. So we do welcome the involvement because they certainly are integral in terms of the discussion that we have. So it is a really good value that everybody's here at the table. So at the year-end reports, we tallied in 2020, we had 203 permits listed, 2021, 238, and then 2022, interestingly enough, 263, which is just 7 shy of the 270 that we initially projected. And that is still standing a number of 14 units that we are still pursuing in terms of making that determination. It gets, an advertisement pops up, they send it to us, we have to go through a process to determine is this actual or not, and so it becomes an art meets science, and throw chicken bones on the table and try to discern out what the number is. But we got a solid 263, which I think is pretty good based on the RFP number that we had done at the beginning. Okay, so there's a lot of verbiage on here in terms on the slides in terms of what's required for the annual license, and I'll just hit on some of the high points here. So a separate vacation rental license is required for each unit on a parcel that has a vacation rental operation conducted on it. So we only allow on residential properties 2 You have a house and a guest house, that's DNR shoreline rules. And so both of those we consider units. And so each of those would be able to have a vacation rental license on it. Now, you get to be a little different, and that's, I'm sure we're gonna have further discussion on this when you get to resort commercial property and what constitutes maybe a resort type operation or what. That's where we have to discuss the definition, and so, and get that right. So, and this is everybody has a copy of the ordinance in their package, and right in front of you as well. So each of those, it basically is pretty straightforward. They have to have a license to be able to operate. They have to get the license within 5 months of the time that we adopted the ordinance. Then the renewal period it's got to be submitted prior to April 30th of that next year. So then in the application, because there's a lot of concern or interest, and I'll be doing a review real quick on that, on the community survey that had gone out. And the responses back from that. So currently, it is required that people acknowledge property liability insurance coverage for the vacation rental operations. We don't check each one, but they have to certify that themselves, self-certification. And then they have to demonstrate that they either have a vacation rental license has been issued by the Department of Health, or a written certification from the property owner that a license is not required by the state of Minnesota, stating the reasons. Now, yes, there are operations in the county that do not, that the Minnesota Department of Health does not and will not issue licenses for. And type of water that's used in it or brought in, it's hand carried, yurts, there's certain kinds of structures that we in Cook County had determined, well, we're eclectic enough and we think yurts are okay. And so we would go ahead and license them. And so we've been having the ongoing discussion with Minnesota Department of Health is what does that mean to them if we license them, but they don't. They don't license them, they're not required and they just don't. Okay, so it puts it in kind of a nebulous category for the people that are doing the vacation rentals themselves. So it's good if we can nail something down and work with the Minnesota Department of Health to kind of fill that gap. So here are the zone districts that they're allowed as permitted uses. All our residential zone districts, the general ones. So we got the FAR 1, 2, and 3, Lakeshore Residential, R1 is the strip that goes along the entire shore of Lake Superior. Tofty Mixed Use District, the Resort Commercial Residential District, and the Wildwood Acres Overlay District. They're all listed as permitted uses. There's no other permit required to them besides just getting the license. We do have 3 zones that are currently in place where they do require conditional uses, or at this point we would issue interim uses because we can put a timeline on an interim use permit. And they would either have to reapply or it would drop dead. So those zone districts are the Lutzen Town Center residential zone districts, the Town Center Residential Initiative, LR1 and LR2, and then the Tofty General Commercial Zone. So all those require additional permits beyond the regular license. So prohibitions. No vacation rental will be allowed in a recreational vehicle. So no RVs. You look at VRBO sites or places, they'll allow it on boats or whatever. But we specifically need residential type structures, dwellings that are going to be allowed for that. No RVs, no vacation rental operation will be allowed in any accessory structure except for a guest cabin. And no more than 2 vacation rental licenses will be issued per parcel in any residential zone district. So not only, do we have that kind of inherent by the fact that most of the places where there are vacation rentals are shoreland, and shoreland you're only supposed to be allowed by Minnesota DNR rules for a dwelling and a guest cabin. We also have that listed in this ordinance for any of those areas that aren't. Okay, Article 5 in the ordinance, the general requirements. Those shall conform to the existing standards listed in the Minnesota statute, rules, and county ordinances. So noise, sanitation, parking, and trespass. So then, there was a lot of responses in the surveys in terms of, hey, there's a lot of noise. Parking's an issue, trespass is definitely an issue, we're talking about signage, keeping people off other property, sanitation, septic systems, that is a lot. And so, yes, we continue to be able to strive to get a good and proper level of enforcement. A lot of times, especially with the noise and the trespass, those issues come up like after hours. We don't have, those have to go to the county sheriff's office. Oh, backing up a little bit with that host compliance service that we have as a part of that cafeteria type list of services that they provide to us. One of is a 24-hour, 7 days a week hotline that people can call and complaints or questions or concerns about vacation rentals, and then they will send that or forward that on to the proper authority. So if someone's trespassing, it will go to the sheriff's office. If it's noise and if it's after hours, it will go to the sheriff's office and such like that. We have found, though, that the vast majority, and I mean the vast majority of the calls going into that 24/7 hotline are requests for information of how they can get a license to set up a vacation rental. So it's almost an information line rather than a call for concern and complaint line. Okay, and then contact information. We do require that they have availability 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, somebody, a point of contact for that vacation rental, and they have to respond to any issues that come up. Now, and as we say here, response to a complaint within 3 hours of being notified, and respond means to acknowledge the notification of an issue and then understand, we all understand it might take longer to address the issue, but at least they have to acknowledge the fact that they got that information in. Okay, so here we list again in the ordinance and general requirements that it is up to the operator's responsibility to contact the Department of Health to get their own license started with them. We'll facilitate giving them the information of who to contact and such, but it's everybody's who's doing a vacation rental, their responsibility to get that in. And then it is also the operator of a vacation rental must submit and report and pay the required Cook County lodging tax at intervals specified by the Cook County auditor. We always look for better ways to be able to kind of verify that information of how the lodging taxes are coming in, and before we issue any license, how can we confirm that indeed they are up to date on their licenses and stuff. So we're trying to do that digitally, so we don't have to pull up paper and go scan through an Excel spreadsheet. So that's part of things we're working on internally with the auditor's office to try to streamline that as well. So I have this up because this is basically the organizational and functional area chart of land services. All right, so the pink boxes are the divisions. We got environmental health, solid waste and recycling, planning and zoning, and parks and trails. We have basically 6 staff in the overall office part, 6 staff working out in the solid waste. We have 3 staff working in planning and zoning altogether. And down in the corner, Joseph Ruth indicated, that's where the vacation rentals and enforcement is. It's a fraction of a position. And so it is difficult no matter what we keep upon ourselves in terms of, and that's kind of part of my mission here is as we go through those, I have to kind of shine the light of a little bit of reality into, we can regulate as much as we want, but it's important that we logistically have the capacity to enforce what we regulate. So we need to be able to match that up and balance everything so that we have the capacity to be able to regulate that stuff. We are in discussion. I am in discussion with administration and personnel, and it's going to be a proposal of mine to actually add a half position into the department. We've had a Parks and Trails director position that had been vacated, and it's still there. It's not been eliminated, but we haven't filled that in a couple of years. So if we add that and then add additional staff with regards to vacation rental and enforcement, I think that would go a long way in helping, because there were a lot of comments, not specifically even just for vacation rentals, but for other things in terms of enforcement and how we need to fulfill that obligation as well. So any questions? Going to take a sip. Dry out.
Steve?
Tim, the number of vacation rentals for 2022 is 263, and the number for 2021 is 234. But there's a change from 21 to 22 in terms of how you look at resort-based properties. I thought that there was in terms of like.
No, our definition was not, it was not a change. We just, it had come up and I suppose you could say it was a change in the fact that we looked at it and there were some that had fallen through the crack. It wasn't a change, it was a determination that we made based off of the criteria and fit those units into the existing definition. So there were more that were relative to the definition, but that wasn't a change, that was just picking up some that had fallen through the cracks.
Yeah, so if it was an apples to apples comparison though, then it's not necessarily an increase of 30 from one year to the next necessarily.
Well, that may be, but I'm just happy that 263 is really close to the 270 that we had initially estimated. There was a lot of work going into that number with our office, the auditor's office, and you guys. We got information from you guys, Cascade Vacation Rentals, and with Bob Thompson, the assessor's office, to come up with that number. So yeah, you may be right. I mean, it's even like with land use permits. There was a huge increase in the number of permits over the last 2 years, 20 and 21, and we're still up, but we're not up near as high as we were back at that 2020 and 2021 level.
Thank you.
Yes.
My main question is, how do I ask questions without seeming naive? Sorry about that. But on one of your last frames there, it was referred to the owner operator submitting a report along with lodging tax. Do we know what that report might include? Would that include the frequency of rental, the number of people involved, which seems relevant?
It does, and we do have the auditor here, and I will say that we have been working with the auditor's office to try to come up with a streamlined thing, and I'll let Brady.
I guess, does that report have a format, or is it just say, here I am and here are my lodging taxes? I'm just curious.
Yeah, one of the big problems that we've run into, and I don't want to be talking for Brady, is that there are so many different districts, there's different areas and different configurations of lodging and lodging taxes, that I don't know that there is one single form, but Brady.
Well, yeah, it isn't a lot of differences, but there's a 1% zone, there's most of it's 4%. But there was some that doesn't have any lodging tax. So there's a little bit of variation between 0, 3, and 4. Most of it is 4%. But to get one form for everyone, I think that we have contact with them, it's easy. But to catch the ones that VRBO and some of those international organizations, that's the hard.
Well, and we had started, just real quick to finish off, we had started with, like I said, this host compliance is basically a cafeteria plan. And there's different modules that you can pull into it, identifying it online and doing the 24/7 hotline and this and that. One of those components was the collection of lodging taxes. And we sat down and worked hard with the auditor's office to see, can we make that work with all the different districts and everything like that? And we found that it just wasn't workable because of the structure that we had with all the different districts and different requirements here. So we didn't utilize that module. That would sum it up, but it would be easier, I think, if it was all consistent straight across the board.
I have a question out here. Hi. This is Hilary out in space. Hi. One of the questions that I have is that I know that we have the number of 263. One of the things, Tim, as you're aware, that got me interested is that there were some places that I had seen and in further checking that they were listed as VRBOs, but they weren't counted. Okay. And so we have this interesting issue you really can't go from a place of what you're doing is trusting that what we get is the number, but in some sense, there may be more than that. And just in my casual thing, which really got me interested in this whole issue, was by finding two that weren't listed and because they were part of a larger group. So I just want to bring that up as a caveat to say, this is the number we're working with. We still have some unanswered questions, but this gives us a framework, but there may be more that we're not aware of for a variety of reasons, and that's hard to figure out. So I just want to put that in there. And then the second thing that I just wanted to say is that, and maybe we'll get this as part of the discussion, but one of the things in reading all the material is that, and looking at some of the residents' concern, is the question about, is there a process or will there be a process for revoking a license? And that's just a future question, but I think that's one to put in the garage for a later discussion.
Thank you, Hilary. Emily?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of clarify, I think what Steve was getting at related to one change in the definitions that I believe happened in 2020 was the addition to the words which are managed and regulated as part of a resort hotel. And that did increase the number of vacation rentals as they were operating under the umbrella of large resorts, but weren't regulated or monitored or managed by the resort. So what we found at our resort was that they did not have licenses. They weren't licensed to the resort. They weren't having regular fire and safety checks. So I petitioned to have that regulated and managed by Additive. And that did add, we have, I believe, 33 units at Caribou Highlands that are in addition to, even though their intended use hasn't changed. They were always vacation rental. They were just managed in a different way, but it is now under the county's licensure. Is that what you're getting at?
Yep. Well, that language has always been the same. So it was just a matter of getting this subgroup together and looking at it, making that determination.
Okay.
So yeah, that language was always there. To go back to the numbers real quick for Hilary's comment, yeah, we understand it's always going to be a flowing number. And as a matter of fact, several years ago, back in 2015, before we even started this, one of our association year annual conferences, we had the city of Minneapolis do a presentation, and they gave the frustrations of running a program such as this and regulating. And they said it is a perpetual whack-a-mole. They pop up, they disappear. They advertise, someone catches them, they take that off the advertisement. So it is 100% a floating number that, yeah, we understand completely, and a lot of work. Joseph's been doing just a ton of work, and Bob Thompson, in terms of verifying what the information would be in terms of numbers that are out there. So that is one of the difficult things. And it's, again, we're just a small jurisdiction, and the city of Minneapolis was pulling their hair out for that, 7 years ago.
Molly, did you have a comment?
I was wondering, Brady, part of what Al's question was what is included in the report that comes with the lodging tax?
Basically, it's sales and then your percentage.
So the revenue, the sales revenue number?
That's the tax accounting kind of thing. I'm just trying to get a handle on. We got figures on the number of properties, or maybe that's the number of licenses over this 3-year period. The actual volume of people may vary. And I'm just trying to get a handle on what the trend line would look like. Is it going up? Is it accelerating? That's why I'm asking the question. Just get a handle on the volume that's coming into the county in addition to the revenue.
Well, and I think that's really important in terms of the metrics that's used. And this was intended just to be an introduction. I anticipate, especially with tax classification, lodging taxes submitted, how they're submitted, I expect that's going to be a more involved, because there's the sales tax, But there's the lodging tax and there's collected different ways, and VRBO will collect the sales tax. They won't collect the lodging tax. So it depends in terms of the metrics used, and I would anticipate having Brady Spearman as a discussion in terms of the lodging taxes collected, and then Bob talking about the tax classification and volumes. He's good at pulling all that together.
Maybe just in with that, so I imagine like with Cascade or with Odyssey or something, it's really managed by an outside organization. Finding out what the actual occupancy nights is probably pretty straightforward, because it's legitimate, right? But in a one-off type situation, is it just like people's trust that, it's licensed by the Department of Health, it's licensed by the county? Or are we just saying, oh yeah, we rented it 25 nights last year and then we're collecting the tax on that? Is there any verification, I guess, on the actual like occupancy? Right, I mean, I don't know, it's a more question. Is there a way for the county to?
Well, it is, and this whole program, that's why we have as many departments in here, because it touches a few departments. It touches land services. We regulate it by strictly in the license. The auditor's office regulates it by virtue of the taxes and such. The assessor's office regulates it with regards to tax classification and such. And so that is part of the point. It's a growing program. I mean, that kind of information is important. We haven't collected that on our level in terms of the licensing stuff, just because the whole point of the initial 3-year period was for us to get a handle on what the issues are, what are the concerns, what do we need to talk about. It wasn't to come out of the 3 years with a perfect system. So that's what this process is for, is to hold up these questions. And you've had your hand up several times.
That's okay, I'd love to talk about. Kind of along those lines, what Anthony was saying. One way of just as an idea of addressing that very issue, because of course, self-reporting, it's like waiters with cash tips, did they claim all of it at the end of the year? Who's to say? But with regard to, an individual running something that's, is, you use the word legitimate, like someone who's doing a small shop and they've got 1 or 2 properties or something. I worked on the vacation dwelling conversation with Duluth for several years, in the city of Duluth. And one of the ways that we tried to mitigate maybe dishonesty is that they and some platforms require this too, but, and I don't, maybe the permit or the license the county already does, I don't know yet, to require them to keep a list of every guest and date filled, and that they have to submit that, and they can redact personal information, but they have to keep a list of every night of occupancy. Which, of course, part of the licensing, it could be clawback or maybe teeth that you would never exercise, but the county can at any point double check that list and say, well, there's evidence of it being rented and you were claiming nobody's there. So we had 3 of those in your license. I'm not trying to, but that's one way of at least trying to hold some accountability to the amount of occupancy that happens, is some self-reported maintenance of a list in order to keep a license valid. Not to create more work for you and your team, but there shouldn't really be much more work. It's on the owner to maintain that and submit it upon request. Just that.
The same kind of sentiment that you both are asking the question of, as far as I sit on the physical county board, and we have had the same question about growth. Is lodging tax related to the number of inventory? Is it related to the number of nights? Is it related to ADR, average daily rate? And so we determined within the county, that's a lot of information for them to collect, because all we get is for lodging tax management is to know the total revenue and the 3% that lodging tax collects. So we've implemented a system within Visico County that's optional to participate in, but gives us more of that data, like how many nights are being sold, and is our growth related to the amount we're charging. It's called desk metrics. Because that's a really important question that everybody wants to know. What is our growth related to? And it kind of ties into the conversation here, because we don't, in like large resorts, don't report number of nights, they just report revenue.
Okay, excuse me, Madam Chair, in the interest of time, and I know that this is a very good discussion, and this is the whole reason we're doing this process, is to get these questions to be filtered up and everything like that. As I indicated, we'll probably have a whole specific time dedicated to the lodging tax issue, to the type of reports issue, to the environmental concerns issue. So we are going to be talking about these things. This is just kind of a kickoff meeting. This is really good information that's out there. But unless there are other immediate questions about the presentation, then I'm going to get into the next presentation.
Sorry, just really quick. I'm just wondering, with the big push to direct book, a lot of these listings are going to these huge platforms like VRBO, Verbo, Airbnb, utilizing the marketing aspect of it, and then pushing towards a direct book, which from a business standpoint is very ideal. But with that, and with the push for marketing on social media, like are the bots the only one that's actually out there looking, and are they only looking on these major platforms, or is there a way? I'm just wondering what really the number is now with how quickly it's all developing.
That's again a really good question, and we, in working with host compliance, we try to supplement that as much as possible. They actually don't monitor CVR sites, so we've worked with CVR to get that information and forward that to host compliance so that they can participate. So any of these other platforms, that's kind of the processes of updating and doing all of that stuff. They do it on their end, host compliance with their AI and their magical bots, and then we do it from what we know, and then we do it also from the auditors, assessors, and Joseph. If somebody's getting a land use permit, and they want to do a duplex, and they just say, oh yeah, we're going to rent this out. Well, there's the flag, and so we tag that one and get them in the hopper and get that one going. So yeah, again, like I said, Minneapolis says it's whack-a-mole, and we're here to testify that it's whack-a-mole.
Okay.
But and that's the whole point of this, is trying to get as good a system in place as we can to catch all of that. So if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to go into the next presentation here.
My question is to Hilary. Did you get the packet, Hilary, so you can follow along?
No, the only thing I got was what was on, all the information that Tim sent out, but that's one of my questions I was going to ask about, that I could pick up a packet would be really helpful.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we didn't, Hilary has all of the information that you guys have. It's just not in a paper form.
Yeah.
So
Right.
We weren't trying to leave you out, Hilary.
No, and I even read it. So, it's nice to have a paper, but I did read it on all the info. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so, and this, again, I'm gonna try to keep it kind of brief. These were included in your packets as well. And basically what these are is this community survey. And yes, we understand, you can always have better surveys that are put out there with better questions. There's a lot of commentary in terms of that. And, one of them was, they should just be all open-ended questions, but we had 580 responses, and that would be really difficult to sort through and kind of catalog. So basically this presentation is going to be a breakdown of basically the raw data, and then you as the committee members and anybody in the public can see through the website what all of those public comments were through the reports that came in. And there's, as you can see, like in any topic in Cook County, there's not two sides to the story, there's 8 to 16 sides to the story, and a lot of perspectives out there, which is good. So we'll just go ahead and start with this. So what best describes your residency to Cook County with regards to Cook County? And you look at the vast majority of folks are either year-round residents or seasonal residents. That's kind of an easy thing. Yeah, so that one, it's by and large, mostly residents are permanent and seasonal in that. So that was interesting there. The familiarity with the regulatory requirements relating to vacation rental operations within Cook County, both with regards to Minnesota Department of Health and Cook County, This one had, kind of an even distribution. Most people are like, yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with it, but then it kind of tapers off to those that are very familiar with it or not so familiar with it to not at all or exceedingly familiar with it. So it's kind of an even flow in that respect. And it's good that the majority of it is somewhat familiar, so that's nice. This is interesting. What is your general opinion of vacation rentals in Cook County? And, you kind of look on the left-hand side, it's very favorable, important part of the local economy, and then somewhat favorable. In the middle is no opinion, and then, which is lowest because everybody in Cook County has an opinion. And then you have somewhat unfavorable, maybe okay, but starting to be too many. And then the last one, very unfavorable. The interesting thing about this question and response is that you take in the unfavorable somewhat and very unfavorable, you end up with about 63% that have that attitude of the respondents, which over 580, close to 600 people, I think is a fair representation. So we can see pretty much what the community opinion is or feel is about that. This is an interesting one. Currently, vacation rentals within Cook County are required to obtain annual licenses for both Minnesota Department of Health and Cook County. With regards to the level of regulatory oversight and your familiarity with the requirements, do you think that they are currently, and then it has a list of categories? And I know that's a super long question. I'm not a gifted person in terms of putting the survey together. Yes, I'm the one that put the survey together. But you look at the answers, and there one is regulated more than they need to be. The second one in blue is regulated about right level with some potential additional standards. The third one is regulated at the right level with no changes necessary. And then the fourth one, which received the singular, the most amount of responses, was not regulated near enough, need major changes. And then the other has a variety of specifics in there. Well, an interesting thing about this one too is if you combine those two, that regulated about right, those two together, whether they could use some changes or not really changes needed, that comes out to over 40%. So 40% feel they're regulated about right, and 35% feels that they're not regulated near enough. So that was kind of an interesting perspective there. Here we have the ranking one, and this is my list of importance, and try to be descriptive in terms of how to list those things. And again, forgive me for the nature of the question or how it was phrased and stuff like that. But if you look at those three lines there, the safety and environmental concerns, the potential adverse impacts on neighboring properties, and then impact on long-term housing, those kind of go in line as being what we've heard anecdotally throughout the years and increasing. When we started this in 2015, it was more the adverse impacts on neighboring properties and such. There was a little discussion about taxes and such, but it was really pretty much mostly that with regards to the environment and sanitation, overuse of septic systems, trespass noise, some of those things like that. And then now you look at the largest column is the impact on longer term housing and such. And so those three together kind of will show that, where the concerns have kind of changed or modified a little bit. Obviously, we have a housing situation here in the county, and that's not just in our county, but it definitely is in our county. Looking at the elements that you feel be reasonable to regulate with regards to vacation rental operations, basically you can just look at those five. The number of rental units on an individual property, which, as I indicated by the ordinance, we already do. We limit that to 2 unless it's a resort commercial property, and they can be considered like a small resort or something like that. The locations of vacation rentals, where they're allowed or permitted, the different type of zone districts, or where in the residential zone districts. There are some places that don't allow them. There's a township in Lake County or St. Louis County that actually bans them in residential zone districts. And
Lakewood Township.
Lakewood Township. And which is interesting because that's the only place we allow them, really, you know, and that's where vacation rental homes are. They're people's homes or second homes and such. Septic compliance, that's a big one. We've been talking internally about that one. Occupancy limits, and then your overall limit on the number of vacation rentals within the county. You know, and when I look at it through the lens and through the eyes of enforceability. So when we're having these discussions, and they're very valid discussions to have, I'm absolutely against passing some regulation that we don't have the capacity to regulate, because then it makes everybody look bad. So I want to be able to craft something. If we are going to regulate something, we have to have something and the logistics to be able to handle the enforcement of all of that. Okay, any questions on that? And I'll say that fortunately for you all, after this, it goes to a brief presentation from Jason on the housing stuff. So you won't have to listen to me much longer anymore, but Al?
Tell me the 579 respondents, were they randomly selected, self-selected? Were they, I'm just curious who they are, because that influences how we can generalize to the general population.
Yeah, it actually went out to the public. It got put out, it was on a website, and we just published it as best as you
So
can.
it was self-selected.
It was self-selected.
There could be duplications, a family could have submitted 5.
There,
I'm just being realistic.
no, that's very realistic, because I did a
It's
discussion
very
with
important to know
Joe
how
Fredericks
to-
at WTIP, and part of what we discussed was that,
Oftentimes, a negative response is going to get vocalized
Yeah.
more than a positive.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
just curious.
And I found that early on in the survey process. I was able to go in there and eliminate duplicates. There had been some, but in my review of the names that were submitted along with all these, I can actually say I feel really good about the broad spectrum of voices and opinions that are in that. There are families, but every adult in a family has the ability to be able to respond to that. But I would say that of the people that I know that are on that list, it is a really good cross section and really does highlight a diversity of perspectives.
Did we also get IP addresses in addition to names?
No,
Because I'm just wondering, you know, it would be, just getting to your point, it would be possible for somebody to use a different name each time they fill out the survey.
well, I think it restricts for the email address or something like that. I think you can vote like maybe once on an email address, so if people change their name and their email address. You know, and can you have a couple that live together with the same IP address that vote, you know,
Yeah,
each one of them should be able to have a vote. So that it's difficult to do that, but of the names that I saw, like I said, I feel actually really comfortable with that. More so than I did during the first week or two where I did see duplicates and was able to delete those, so. So if there aren't any other questions, then I'm going to key up the other presentation.
Brady, I think I'm gonna stand and hover right behind you. Okay. So I'm worried so bad. I've been sitting at a desk all day, so if it's okay, I think I'll stand for a little bit. Fall asleep on my seat. Tim had asked me to just cover a bit of an overview in housing in Cook County, which could take me 5 hours. But we have like 10, 15 minutes. So in light of the housing study that just came out, I don't know if folks had seen it, but the EDA had secured a housing analysis, needs analysis, and it was published, I think, last week, a week and a half ago. So in light of that, I was just kind of cover sort of the baseline where we are. And in fact, the HRA and the board, we're going to be having a housing summit, about a 2.5 hour summit in this room right after Labor Day. To talk about where we are, where we think we need to go and get some community feedback on the housing situation. So
wait, I just want to say, yeah, if you do screen share and start slideshow, it's really helpful. Last time it came up screen share, but you didn't start the slideshow. So it would be nice, if possible. I'm just wondering about the technology being able to do that. That would be really great.
He's working on it. I should, we should be able to blame our IS.
There we go. You just click that.
There it is. Okay, thanks, Hillary.
Can you see it?
I can see it as long as you start the slideshow. So it just has the first thing, housing, and we'll see if it's the slides move. That would be great.
Okay. You can click that. So, I mean, obviously we all know why we're here, but I thought it'd be helpful a little bit to set some context, kind of set the stage. We're really here because the nature of short-term dwellings has changed dramatically in the last 15 years. Cook County has always been a destination for short-term rentals of all kinds, but really the advent of the interwebs and the ability for an individual to put their home to be public, like someone was commenting earlier, the big platforms, the Airbnbs, the VRBOs, that is a game changer. And we've seen that's dramatically changed a lot of communities across the country. So Cook County is actually really, I think, in a pretty well-positioned place. We're talking about it now. There are other communities across the country that have people have been entirely priced out of their markets because Airbnb, investors or whatever have come in and bought a ton of the housing stock, and then they have rented them all. So think of a beach town on the West Coast. Suddenly you can't afford to live within 50 miles of that town. And of course, it's sort of a self-eating beast because when they remove all the housing, people can't work at the places that people want to go. So obviously it's becoming a problem, or it's at least a conversation that we need to have here, but I'm grateful we're doing it now and not after the fact when we realize, oh shoot, it's too late. Because of, oh, go ahead.
Hillary's got her hand up and I noticed.
Yeah.
Are you not seeing the screen change?
No, what's happening is that we haven't started this, you haven't hit start slideshow. So I'm still on just the housing in Cook County. Nothing else has moved forward. And if you can't, that's fine. I can just listen to you. But if there's no way to move the slideshow forward to start it, says start slideshow, that would be great. And if not, that's fine. I'll just listen.
Well, it is moving for us and it
Okay.
was, yeah, the last.
Okay. Okay.
I can send it to you too, Hillary.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll just listen to you. That would be nice.
Sorry you have to listen to me. Just again, quickly, that we know most of this, but I just think for stage setting, it's helpful. We're really here because the question becomes, where's the balance of respecting the economic engine that is tourism in this county, and also respecting that residents need to be able to afford to live here. And that's kind of the crux of the conversation. Of course, resorts, that's another thing. We've always had resorts in the North Shore. They're operated and maintained and managed as a resort for that reason. But when we start talking about individual single-family homes that were, let's say, previously lived in by a family, those are bought and used as a short-term rental, that's a different conversation. So that's at least my experience at Duluth and elsewhere along Lakewood Township, which you mentioned, Tim. That's been the conversation. What do we do about that? The last thing quick is, I think we're all agreeing to some extent, we need to have, there has to be regulation and oversight. The question is how much, what does it look like, and how do we do it? So you can go to the next one. Can you, is it, okay.
I fixed it.
You fixed it. Thank you. I think you can see it now.
Great.
So this is data pulled from the county assessor, from their raw data. I just think it'd be interesting to set the table a little bit. We have almost 15,000 parcels in the county. I highlighted these two things for a reason. It's kind of remarkable that half of the buildings in Cook County that could be used as homes are seasonal rec homes. Now that includes everything from cabins to yurts to all the things, rustic to really nice homes, that are cabins on a lake that you can easily live in year round. The point is we have pretty significant housing stock in Cook County, but half of it's for single family full-time use. Just something to chew on when we think about, wow, there's almost a 1-to-1 ratio for residents to homes. But this also points to the huge economic driver that is tourism. It says, like, look at half of the housing stock is for seasonal recreational homes, which is a big deal. We can't ignore that. The other thing I want to point out quick, this is again raw data. There might be some overlap from, I don't know if it's the number that Tim had, 634. I don't know if that was the beginning of the process. This was a few weeks ago that I pulled. According to the county assessor, the record classification says that there are about 656 in this category of short-term dwellings. And again, that includes the resorts, and Tim already went through the kind of differentiation of that. The last thing I want to point out is there have been 59 permits pulled for building, And again, that includes yurts, bunkhouses, town, all of the types of dwellings in the last 7 years. Another important note, though, is that's permits pulled. And I think probably everybody in this room can think about a property where the garage has been started for about 5 years and someday they'll get to the house. So, that there's a foundation, but we don't know what's going on. That's not issuance of a certificate of occupancy, that's a permit pull. So it doesn't equate to that's how many homes have been built, just to be clear. Go to the next one. Okay, so the study that I referred to, Loci Consulting out of Minneapolis or metro area was hired to produce this housing needs analysis. The EDA, again, contracted with them before the HRA was formal, before I existed here. I was in existence. But I just want to point out, this is the case with any study. The data that is on the outside of it, or the deliverable, is only as good as the data that you input. And as we already talked about, nothing is perfect, especially with housing. It's a lot of moving parts and fluid dynamics, especially with short-term rentals. The other thing is, I've already been asked by some community members, why do we need a housing study? We already know we need more housing. The reason is because the bank and the developers and the grant providing community doesn't take my word for it. They want proof that we actually need it, and they want a quantified amount of what that looks like. Again, a study is not perfect, but it does provide a baseline. Just like we were talking about with the host compliance system, it helps us provide a framework to work off of. And frankly, the need is high enough, and I'm not really worried we're going to overbuild. I don't think that's a problem we'll be facing in the near future. I'm going to go over just the 3 categories of what that study talks about. Sorry, I didn't get in front of you here. There's rentals, single family dwellings, and then senior housing. Those are the 3 major breakdowns of the housing study. You can see I highlighted 2 things for a reason. One, this is probably not surprising. The biggest need is for affordable rentals. We don't have many in this county at all. If you try to rent something, good luck. I don't even know where you go to rent something. I tried when I accepted this position. There wasn't a place to look. I had to know somebody who knew a guy, and then I found a house, thank God. And apparently that's not uncommon. That's the story in Cook County. Like, I mean, all of you are nodding your heads because that's how it works. But you cannot build anything today and rent it for $840 a month unless it's a shoebox. It's just physical. I just got a quote from a GC for an apartment building I'm working on, and it was $300,000 a unit to build. And that's for studios 1s and 2s. So when you think about that, and that's a scaled project, the numbers don't work. So unsurprisingly, the biggest need is where it's the hardest to build and the people who have the least means to afford it. But I also thought it was interesting to point out that the biggest need is actually market rate units. And a part of this, you can look at the studies available online. If anybody wants it, we can send you a link. Again, the EDA, I think they did a press release for it. So you can look at the methodology and how we made the determinations and the projections that the author did. But the point is, there's a decent number of market rate apartments demanded or absorbed by at the end of 2026. And the reason for that is because the data has shown the places that are renting, or the places that are new that are renting, are more market driven. That's because the rents have gone up, so that's where the demand is, and that's if you look back at what is being purchased or rented, you're watching price progression happen. So that's the assumption that that's what's going to be filled in the future too. So single family dwellings, a little different. This was interesting. A lot of people had questions about this. You would think, I did because I had a long conversation with the author about this, that the demand would be for this category, like it should be flipped, right? That the highest demand should be for the more affordable units. The reason that it's flipped is because, again, you can't build a house for $200,000 and sell it. It's just the math doesn't work. So the reason that it's estimated demand is up to 200 by 2026 is because realistically, that's the kind of price point you can afford to, builders can afford to build a home and sell it. And when we look at the price progression that's happened, particularly in the last 2 years in Cook County, it's been astounding. The median sale value in May was $420,000. 2 years ago, same time, it was $240,000. So that's incredible. Which again is just indicative of what people are willing to pay to live in this community, and people are obviously with different levels of means are locating or relocating here. There's a lot of things that go into that, but the point is the reason this is so much higher than the smaller or less costly housing is because you can't afford to build and sell these. And if you do, there's going to be a finite amount. Think of like a tiny house or something, and there's not going to be a huge demand. There's going to be some demand for that product, and I'm working on some of that. But it's not going to be nearly as big as the standard 1,200 square foot 3-bed, 2-bath house. The last category here is senior housing. I think something worth pointing out is that, well, I certainly have a reason, but that there's demand in these other categories, sure. The reality is that seniors, especially when we talk about things, has anybody heard of the age in place, that phrase, aging in place? Yeah. It's really started to happen because the cost of assisted living in senior facilities is so high that seniors would rather live in the house they paid off 20 years ago and have services come to them. And so there's a whole actually flipping of the model of providing senior care. A lot more, and COVID's complicated this, of course, but a lot more on-site in-home visits from staff who don't have to have an office space, lower overhead for that reason. But the biggest driving factor is the cost of building and operating an assisted living or a senior facility. The biggest demand, of course, is in these higher intensive service driven products. But when you're talking $4,500 to $5,000 a month to rent in one of those, like a memory care facility, there's no reason we haven't had any built in Cook County for a long time. There was, as I've learned, there were conversations for several years about assisted living facilities, and it didn't happen because the math didn't work. So there's still a huge need there. And if you talk to a hospital, they have 37 beds in their, I believe it's nursing home facility up and attached to the facility. There are 37 beds, 31 of them are full. There is a 20-person waiting list and 6 are empty because of staffing. They can't staff the 6 that they could fill. So clearly there's demand, but there's a whole bunch of problems leading into the housing situation, workforce. We could talk for a long time about all of those things. The point is there is a need for it. Our population in Cook County, we get second place, congratulations, for the oldest in the state. Aiken's beating us by like 3 years, but it's the median age is about 52. So it's Aiken, Cook, everyone else. Minneapolis, I think, is 38. So for perspective, this is going to go up. This is really going to go up in about 10 years. But this is still the need, by end of 2026, which as a percentage of the housing stock is not insignificant. One more for me, Tim. So just in summary, if you add all of that together, we need about 500 to 600 units of housing by 2026. It's not a perfect number. Again, I'm not concerned we're going to overbuild because that's a pretty tall order. I worked on about 1,200 units in Duluth, and that's a town of 87,000 people, and that took 5 years. So the point is, we have our work cut out first for sure, and this obviously plays into the conversation about short-term dwellings because, when you take one off of the market, that's what's the highest and best use of that house. In a market-driven economy, it's giving the most money for that space. If you were to take off any sort of social or ethical, any other considerations, it's purely market-driven. It would be how much can we get for the space. Of course, we're having this conversation because that needs to meet how do we sustain living here. And again, long-term, the tourism economy needs people to live here that can afford to live here. Otherwise, there is no tourism economy. So any questions on all of that?
Yes. Go ahead.
You had your figure of 656 units, including resorts for short-term rental. What is the amount without resorts?
That was the same that Tim had indicated. So that's just the county's classification as short-term dwelling. So I took all the county raw data and figured that out. So it's just a discrepancy of about 22 units from when they originally pulled that figure, when they were soliciting host compliance's help.
Was there a reason that you didn't factor that into the study? Have a separate category for vacation rental because it is a housing, because it takes away from the residential stock?
Yeah, two things. One, I wasn't here when the study was done. No idea. I'm inheriting the study after I started. Two, that's a very difficult thing to quantify. So again, there was already conversations about what's the trend, and we don't have a really good handle on that. So how many people are going to be buying, let's say there was the 190 or whatever, the 150 single family homes. How many of those would be for vacation dwellings versus permanent? Well, the best that they can do is look at previous sales data and inventories and then project into the future. The ultimate end use of that, we don't know. But that's the number that could be absorbed for a variety of reasons. This is the presumption. And again, I can send you this, oh, you have it. They should be talking about the methodology in the back, and I'm sure Grant would be happy to talk about that too. It's a good question. I asked him the same thing.
So the other thing that I've seen happen in the last couple of years is there are a number of homes that have been purchased and have not been rented out on a short-term basis, but are just being used as second homes. And the stock that's being purchased for that is stock that historically I think would have probably been more what we would have called workforce housing, but now those homes are appealing to folks as a second home. And I don't have any numbers around that, but it would be interesting to see some numbers around that piece of it, because just from the anecdotal things that I've seen, that seems to be increasing quite a bit.
So I went through all of the ECRD data. So every time a transaction happens in the state of Minnesota, the county has to call and verify the sale. And so that's recorded in the certificate of real estate value. And you can look any of them up on the Minnesota Department of Revenue site. They have a nice search feature. So I went through last year to look at all the transactions that had happened in a single family category. There were, I believe, 89. And again, this is imperfect because it doesn't give you all the data, but as much as I could get. And of those 89, 35 of them were for people who were that lived outside of this community. So most of them were from Grand Marais to Grand Marais or Tofty to Schroeder. They're people who were moving around, but a third of them, more than a third of them, were for people who were buying. They listed their current zip code and their permanent zip code as Minneapolis, Texas, like all over the place. And so presumably those were for second homes. And we're talking about a third of the housing stock. That's not insignificant. That was 1 year, just a snapshot in time. I didn't want to go through every year because it took a while to do it. But it gives us an idea that, yeah, you're right, Steve, there are people buying second homes. And especially with the advantage we have here of fiber for remote work. I love it. It's better than I had in Duluth. And I live in the woods. It's fantastic. Also, we're not alone in recognizing the advantage that is.
Could those also end up showing up in the short-term rental market as an investment property by those people?
They could, but they should be going through the licensing process with the county. But at the time of transaction, it doesn't indicate what the primary use is going to be.
Okay, well, thank you, Jason,
Welcome.
and we're looking forward to the summit.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Right now, we have part of our agenda for public comments, and I do know that we do have a public commenter back here. Greg, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Greg Westigard, a resident of Schroeder, and I'm here as an individual, not representing anybody. No person's property should be negatively impacted by the failure of the county to enforce its own ordinance. I propose an addition to the vacation rental ordinance, add to 4.0 license application requirements. This demonstration of current certification of inspection compliance with the county's septic ordinance number 58. And I note the county septic ordinance states that existing systems are required to have compliance inspections anytime there is an expansion of use or a change of use in a building which may impact the performance of that system. The fact that this is not being done and that this does not comply with this bothers me. And when you redo this, if you add just that one section, and we talked about enforcement, I would like to see that one thing so that each of our properties, we know that we're not going to have our wells or so on damaged. I've had handed to Tim an extension of these comments, noting other things that I would like to have spread out, but this just simple as that, to add that so that these two documents coincide. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment? Yes.
I'll just make a couple of comments. Greg, well respected by the Schroeder community, a neighbor of mine. Committee moves forward, like to have them find balance for one. Two, maybe it might be nice if the county produced a map with the red dot where every vacation home rental is located. Right now, you kind of see if they're clustered in a particular area. And three, sometime I would like a question answered. If the committee moves forward with restricting vacation home rentals in currently allowed zoning districts, would current permits be grandfathered in after the new ordinance is revised or enacted?
Thank you.
Madam Chair, did you want me to address that? Okay, the way that non-conformities and what you're looking, anytime you make a change in an ordinance, and if something's permitted at some particular time, and then you make it either conditional use or change the status of it, even prohibited, that use, that individual property, if that was legal and lawful at the time of that change, does get to carry with it a grandfathering, so to speak, but it's called a legal nonconformity then. And those legal nonconformities then sunset based off of the either 12 months of non-use of that or whatever. There's criteria for those legal nonconformities to fall off, but they do carry that with it as long as that use is continuing and they have that right at the time that the changes are made. And if I can, real quick, address the septic issue. We know that that's a huge issue. And we frankly, during the first go around, intentionally left the septic requirements up to the Minnesota Department of Health. Minnesota Department of Health does require a certificate of compliance for all vacation rental unit operations, and that's a part of their licensing program. We specifically kept that out of our county level license program because from 1999 until just a few years ago, we were operating what was called the Lakeshore Septic Compliance Program, where we would go along to each of the lakes, we would identify a lake, and we would do septic inspections on that lake. Everybody on that lake who was failing then had 2 years to bring their system up to compliance. And we ended up being a victim of our own success because we ended up with a pot of over 100 and some systems that needed to be upgraded. And we put a pause on that program and to focus on those systems. And that was right at the same time. We're just mopping up right now the last handful of those systems. And so at the time that we initially adopted it, we wanted to address the septic requirements, but we kept that at the state level so we could focus on those that we had already identified. So it is in our hopper, and we will be taking a look at that anyway.
A couple of comments here on certificates of compliance and septic inspections. Minnesota Department of Health requires a certificate of compliance. It can be from an installation of a system 20 years ago. So it's not necessarily a recent septic inspection. So we don't know if that system is today in compliance with our ordinance or the state rules. The other thing is the state of Minnesota, through the Minnesota Department of Health, will license properties except, as Tim has pointed out, yurts, properties with carry-in water, properties with lake water systems, and certain tiny homes, depending on square footage, and there's a number of other issues there. So we have not a lot, I would say we have probably at least 20 systems, properties that are licensed for vacation rental that are carry-in water or lake water systems. Since the state doesn't license these, they also don't license, if somebody is saying, I'm only going to rent once in a 7-day period, they don't require a license at the state level. So those are all, as it were, slipping through the cracks as far as the septic inspection. And I personally, in my conversations with Mitchell Averson, who's our environmental health officer, we have concerns about this because the state isn't going to pick this up, even on an old certificate of compliance, and we're not looking at these systems. So the concerns that have been expressed about this, I think, are valid, and that maybe that's something that this committee can address at some point in our discussions.
Thank you. Anybody else back here? I'll take one more question, then we're going to move on to discussion questions. Did you have something, Emily?
I just, not necessarily a question, so I'll wait a comment.
All right.
Okay. Just related, we're hearing this capacity to regulate quite often. And so I think that within this discussion has to have that considered. But I also feel like there's some simple fixes just in some small processes like the naming of these properties, for example. It's complex for host compliance to track them down because of the names and not necessarily being indicative of who the host is. And those things like making, requiring the name of the property, the host be listed on these marketing websites, be the same as who the license is in, be the same as who the lodging tax reporter is. Requiring those three things to be identifiable, I think would help in regulatory action. Because then you're not, I've looked at them myself and can't, but I think a small change, small requirement like that would be helpful in regulation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Tim, you want to move on to the discussion questions?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And we are getting into the final stretch on this, and I only put two questions on there to kind of start the discussion with anticipation that, we might not even be able to plow through that second one. I think the first one is a bit on the easy side. I'm not sure, I've talked to anybody who is in opposition to this, but we'll plow through them anyway. And the first one, I guess, is a question for us to contemplate. We have been regulating them by license for 3 years now, or going on 3 years. And should we continue to regulate? Not how we should regulate them, but should we continue as a county level to regulate vacation rental or short-term rentals? And just throw that out there for discussion.
Yes.
I think the licensing process has been good. I always am in favor of making data-driven decisions, and you guys have accumulated a lot of data over the last several years, and that helps us make better decisions going forward. So I am in favor of the licensing program, and I think it's done a good job collecting data.
I guess I would, thank you, Steve. I guess I would rephrase the question. Is there anybody who thinks that the county should stop regulating vacation rentals altogether and have it go back to strictly a permitted use with no additional permits required? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. So there's the first one, checklist. See, we're moving right along here. That was the easy one, serving it up low. Now the next one, and I'm not even sure we're going to be able to finish this discussion up, but maybe it's something to take home with you. And then that is the definition of vacation rentals. As I indicated, what we define it as is what determines how many there are. And where are our concerns to be? When we started off with this, we weren't really concerned about the resort aspect of it because we were focused strictly on the adverse impacts to neighboring properties and residential areas, lake shores, things like that. So we do know that there are issues though with resorts and self-management and taxes and this. If somebody has a cell-phone unit and they do not have the resort manage that, then that person who's renting it would have the expectation that they can go up to the front desk for anything and they'll just get serviced when that's not really the case. And so I know that there's concerns and such like that out there, but that kind of goes to the issue of how much should we as a county level, is that just a business model issue that has to be worked out? Certainly in vacation or in resort complexes or resort areas, it's anticipated that the level of use, level of noise, level of all of this, and it's not really a trespass issue, would be higher than that of residential areas. So do we need to be involved in resort commercial activities and zones or resorts themselves? And if we are, to what extent? And so that kind of goes to the definition of it. It is a wonky definition, looking at it. And so we're certainly open to massaging that however we feel need be. And once we kind of determine that, it's I think the same discussion of what the goals of this program is going to be. What are our goals in this? And do we include reflecting or regulating units in a resort as part of our goals. And so that, I just throw that, I guess, out to everybody for discussion in terms of how we should really identify and define vacation rentals. We've been having a lot of discussion internally about it, and just throw it out there.
Well, I could comment again. I have lots of opinions on this topic. I think that I'll just briefly summarize the situation of large resorts, my large resort. 33 self-renters within a resort community. It has made all sorts of points. Our perspective and our wish to address and why we believe that short-term rentals within resort communities should have to be licensed is just that more regulatory action is needed in general. For example, Caribou Highlands Complex seats about 1,000 people. When you think about the density of population, it's a large complex. So we could have potentially about 300 people on property that we wouldn't know are there. There's no process that requires them to report their guests other than what we've tried to do on an association level. So there's a lot of health and safety concerns, we feel, especially when you're talking about, I've had numerous situations, 3 in particular, a missing person, a domestic violence issue, and several evacuation issues. As the resort property manager, I don't know who's on site, and I can't give you a manifest of everybody that's here, and that's major potential problems. At least with starting with the county license is the only way that we can ensure that they have a Minnesota Department of Health license. And by having those 2 licenses, at least they're kicked into the system. So I know that they're out there so that our homeowners associations can manage these. Because you have to remember, all big resorts, for most, there's two functions. There's rental function and there's homeowner association function. And in general, the homeowners associations really don't have anything to do with rental. They're not going to manage or be involved necessarily in specific rental functions. So in my situation, we needed to know that these had healthy places to stay, that had health department licenses, that had renewed fire extinguishers and so forth. So we've had a million problems. Most of those we've tried to kind of self-solve, but I definitely am dependent on some county regulation, especially when you look at just the amount of people that we have there. There's a huge amount, it's a huge concentration. It's a density issue for us too.
Don't the bylaws address that, Emily?
No.
Could the HOA change the bylaws to not allow short-term rentals?
They could.
But they don't want to.
Well, they all would require any sort of, depends on the, composition of the board at the time. We've tried for 2 years, almost 3 years, to get some regulatory function, but they can't, when they're dependent on the votes of the whole, a 2/3 vote or whatever they are.
Can't get the votes to pass it. So people still want, I'm just asking because it's kind of a weird.
It is
spot.
it's a weird one, yeah.
So not the people that represent the HOA want the ability to rent their property.
Right.
So there's like the property right piece of it, and they're not breaking any HOA rules.
Right.
But my presumption is the big problem comes in because people who are complaining or staying there or any resort assume you resort is managing those, and you're not.
Correct.
And you don't know what's going on, you don't know who's there, and you contact them.
Correct.
So how do you think the county could, aside from the permitting or licensing process, where's the missing link?
Well, I think there's there's potential ideas. There's, there's what I would require what I would hope could be addressed or in some, potentially listed here as professional property management. If I have 33 units managed from the Twin Cities that cannot respond or do not respond to their renters' issues, whether it be a large issue or a small issue, I can't guarantee there's no assurance that those issues will be addressed. So potentially within large complexes or really highly dense populated areas like resorts, The county could help by making sure that they have some levels of professional property manager. Now, Steve manages units on Caribou Highlands property. I have no issues with Steve. It's professional property management. I know if there's an issue, Steve's gonna respond, or his team will respond. So we have there's not a competitive issue here. It has, I would rather Steve takes the 33 units that I don't manage and manages them. But it's really important, like I say, 1,000 people. It could have major effects and could be potentially very, could have a lot of ripple effects health and safety wise. So requiring professional property management, and by that I don't mean just a broker, just somebody in name. I mean somebody that is responsible for reporting the lodging tax, that professional manager is, is checking the box that they're responsible for reporting lodging tax, that they're responsible for their 24-hour, that their name is on the 7-day-a-week contact, that their name is on the license. That's what I do.
And just for resorts, to be clear, not for, you're saying just for high density resort.
I'm saying for,
operations?
and it may apply to other, if there is other high density situations within the county, I'm not sure, but I definitely feel at resorts, professional property management is important.
I know for lodging tax, here, we don't sign the lodging tax. I never signed that I submitted lodging tax. Detroit Lakes, I always have to sign it, my personal signature, so you know who's responsible. So that's an easy thing that could possibly be changed on everybody, hotels, to actually sign the lodging tax. So you're responsible. If you're gonna sign it, you're in trouble.
I have a question for Brady about that. My understanding is that sales and lodging tax here, if there's going to be an audit, it's going to come from the state. Is that correct? For example, the state came through and audited us for sales and lodging tax. And so as an individual, are you subject to the same, that would be the audit path, would be through the state of Minnesota through revenue, or is there a different audit path?
There's potentially audit within the ordinances. If there's an issue identified, under those, the auditor's office can go out and meet with the individual, look at their records. So I don't know what the state, above and beyond that, I'm not sure.
And as it relates to the complexity of the number of contacts that you have, instead of having 33 property managers that are reporting to the county or managing licenses, or that, having a simpler amount of points of contact, property managers, I think would be helpful from a regulatory standpoint, capacity to regulate.
Is there a response time in the ordinance now, Tim? Because I think one of the things we're driving at really is that there's an issue with who to contact in the case there's a problem. Like, how do we, whack-a-mole, I think as you said before, how do we find that person? Is there what I'm trying to discern here is that there seems to be an inherent difference that I think we have to be careful about. Somebody who owns a property, maybe it's a second home and they're hoping to retire it or something, and they're renting it out when they're not here. And they live in the metro area. Well, do they need professional property management? Are there even enough professional property managers who want to take on all of it? Maybe you're open for business, I don't know. Not for those apparently, but I guess my point is I can see the resort situation because it's a more complicated environment, and the presumption is that this resort's running it, that they're not. And HOAs could handle that, but it sounds like they don't want to. So that sounds messy. Is there something in the ordinance that speaks to, the person to contact, point of contact for the license has to be available within an hour or something? I've seen that in other communities where they say you can't be more than an hour or 2 hours away from in case of emergency, that sort of thing.
Well, we do have, and that was one of the points in the presentation, we do have the response time of 3 hours. So the 24/7 point of contact has to respond in 3 hours. Now that response is really just at a base of recognizing what the issue is or acknowledging receipt of it, and really depending on the issue or the problem is what kind of determines what that actual response time would be. So if you have an overflowing septic system per se, that needs to be responded to much more readily than something else.
But a response is an acknowledgement or communication, not on site, because that might be a big differentiator. You say you have to be on site within 3 hours.
or
That means
20
that-
minutes.
Right, well, I mean, but then you're saying somebody from Grand Marais can't own a property in Schroeder, and that seems a little weird. But maybe thinking about actual physical ability to be on site within X amount of time, and I'm not trying to say it's how long, that might help solve some of the questions.
I think it's a great idea, but then you come back to your problem with enforcement. I don't know how you guys enforce that.
When it comes time to enforcement, we look down the table and contact our county attorneys and look for, and a lot of everything that is going to be discussed, whether it's the notifications that are on there, we have to vet that through our county attorney's office to what extent we even have the authority to be able to impose that as a requirement. So there are steps that we go through that may be recommendations from this committee that we might not be able to implement just because of the legality behind it. But it's a good discussion, and yes, I think it's important to have a timely response. And Steve, exactly right. I mean, if someone's all the way up at the end of the Gunflint Trail, and they own a unit in Schroeder, what extent are they doing it, and how do we enforce that? And if it's in the middle of the night, then we're just kind of playing catch up afterwards. So it is good to address it. We just got to figure out how that needs to be done.
I have.
Hilary? Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. So, I mean, it seems like we're having two different discussions right now. The question started about definition. And then the issue was raised when you take a look at like the Highlands, Caribou Highlands, and you have a large group of people with potential for public safety issues there. How do you do regulation within a group like that? So that there is a correlation, but they're really separate issues in some ways. And then I think the other factor that you have to put in that I keep thinking about, that I hear you keep saying, Tim, is that we're understaffed now. So that if you think about developing regulations, what's doable, what's realistic, and to have regulations without the ability of enforcement is really frustrating in all kinds of ways. So I would strand out, what are some of the public safety issues that I hear being raised when you've got a large group of people, you don't know who's there, you don't know what's going to go on, and you have non-responsive, or you don't know who's really behind the management. That's one issue. And that's different from definition, but it's related too. So I just want to strand those two out.
Good points.
And I would say, if I could, Madam Chair, in response, I really don't want to highlight it too much in terms of the staffing, because I want all of the ideas to come out. I want us to really be able to discuss the whole broad spectrum, and then we can come to it later in terms of what kind of impact that would be on staffing needs as to whether we can accomplish that or not. But it's good to get it all on the table. And one perspective too is, okay, there is this concern about the high density or the resort areas. It is possible to define and then have separate provisions for those units that are in resorts or in the high density type areas from those that are vacation rental homes in just residential areas. So that kind of element is possible as well.
Right.
Okay, I think the last 5 minutes, we'll talk about setting our next meeting. So.
Okay, and we had set this up by virtue of the survey Monkey had sent out for people to check off when they're available and such. In the fact that we have this kind of defined window that we want, I just at least want a little discussion in terms of what kind of comfortability level there is within the committee to meet, how frequently, every other week, every third week, what's kind of a comfortable range, because if you start plugging in, every other week in 2 months time period, that defines it down to so many meetings. If you do it every 3, it knocks that down by another half. So does anybody have any, and does this day being a Monday evening, 5 to 7 work best? It seems, that's what the grid worked out to indicate, is that Monday evening at 5 was kind of a better day for folks, unless they're on a vacation or something like that. So those two things, the particular day and then the frequency.
What's our time limit exactly? We need to bring that before the board by the end of August, is it?
Well, I think we can go into mid September. like working towards October, but understanding that we would have to take this recommendation, bring it to the Board of Commissioners at their meeting, and they only meet twice a month. And then they give it, decide on that recommendation, and then it would have to go through the public hearing process, which goes through the notice, the planning commission, and then back to the commissioners again after that's done. So we have to have that kind of cushion. And so I'm thinking, no later than kind of mid to late September.
Yes.
I think that, I know it's the busy time of year for all of us up here, the tourist season, and it's tough to meet often, but I think to get out ahead of this, I mean, we have a very short window of time, I think every other week. And if we get up to a certain point and we're comfortable with it, we can go to every 3 weeks. But every 3 weeks right now, that's only going to give us 3 or 4 meetings. 5 meetings maybe.
So every other week would be the first week of August.
I would think that would be the
That would be
preference.
August 1st, Monday, August 1st.
Question, do we have any idea what the agenda would be? Will we have homework like we did this time?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Alan. I think what we would like to probably do, and people tell me if I'm wrong with this, I think it would be helpful to have probably presentations from the assessor's office on the tax classification, and then maybe from the auditor's office with regards to the collection of lodging taxes and how that's done and what can be looked at it and perhaps improving in that perspective. In terms of the homework from this, just looking at the list in that report of the steering committee where those questions start, just kind of looking at those, and I will send out kind of a tentative agenda that lists some of those questions. It's difficult, we got kind of 2 items on this one, but we had a lot of presentations. So I want to spend a very minimal amount of time on the presentations and then more time on the discussion.
So if getting to those questions is the meat of what we're going to do.
Yeah.
I wonder why wait 2 weeks? What is the reason we would wait 2 weeks?
Time.
People's availability?
It is a busy summer. And I'm grateful for everybody. I'm grateful for a full room like this. We've got other committees and commissions and stuff. This is really hard to get everybody together. So this really speaks to the commitment of people who volunteer to come on here. Really appreciate that.
Could I suggest one little piece of homework? Maybe we all write down, say, 3 or 5 of our top items, concerns, the changes that we want to see made to the ordinance or removed from the ordinance. Just as a little exercise.
I think within that, there's 2 buckets of concern. There's the health, safety, good neighbor concern. And then there's the housing concern that are kind of unrelated, but both, from how I'm seeing people's concerns, there's really 2 major division, and they're different concerns.
How we cover
Right.
and what the expansion, or limiting out,
If we do that, if we submit those, can we, and Tim, if you don't have the time, I'll volunteer to do it too. If we could aggregate that and see where there are kind of overlapping concerns as opposed to having 50 different topics to cover.
And frankly, I think it would be a good idea, and I've done this in some of the previous exercises we did with this, is if everybody gets them to me, then I can send them out to the committee to do another ranking, of those and see, who gets them, unless we have 20 times 5 different levels of concerns. Yeah.
Okay, so 3 to 5 concerns to Tim.
And as Madam Chair, what I will do is based off of tonight's meeting, I will send out what we talked about in terms of the homework to take a look at those questions and specific questions to look at, and also 3 to 5 of those things, and then look for people to submit them back to me via email.
Okay.
So that our task is going to be articulated by an email.
Yes,
from you. Thank you.
Okay, so Monday, August 1st at 5 o'clock. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate everybody.